Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Billy Napier, the Florida Gators, kicking off spring practice in the month of March. And want to dive into some storylines and some position battles and questions that we want to see answered by this Florida program heading into that 2024 season. This is not only the most important offseason for Billy Napier during his tenure at Florida, it's also, in my mind, a really exciting one. You take a look at this depth chart and this roster. There's a lot of competition, but most importantly, a lot of young talent working their way up through this program that I think is going to be pushing for a lot of playing time heading into 2024. And that's exactly what you want in an SEC program like the Florida Gators. Want to get into some of those position battles, some of those questions that we have about this roster. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. A massive shout out to the Florida Gator fans, whether we're talking this team on the recruiting trail, in the transfer portal, doing position deep dives. You guys continue to show a ton of love, a ton of support, a ton of feedback to the boys. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start with, in my mind, the biggest storyline for this Florida Gators program heading into 2024, and that is the offensive line, which was largely a disaster in 2023, specifically at that offensive tackle spot. And this is where you got to give a ton of credit for Billy Napier and the staff to go in and add depth and add competition to this tackle room. You suddenly look at what this tackle position is going to play out as. You bring in a guy in Brandon Crenshaw-Dickson, who I think is kind of a lock at this point to be a starting tackle for the Florida Gators. Got a chance to go back, watch a little San Diego State film. He's nails. He's a guy that I think is a plug-and-play guy at that tackle spot. And again, it is hard to find reliable tackles in the transfer portal. I think the Florida Gators found one with Brendan Crenshaw-Dickson. Now, you have Austin Barber coming back, maybe the move back to right tackle. That was by far his better position in 2022. The guy I want to talk about is Devin Manuel, a guy that in my mind is so exciting. He came on late for that Arkansas team in that 2023 season. A guy with all the traits that you want in an elite offensive tackle. I think there is still some development to take place, but you went out and grabbed one, kind of just a high floor guy in Brendan Crenshaw-Dickson. You know he's going to come in, give you good tackle play. And then you go get a guy in Devin Manuel, who I think has a higher ceiling than Brandon Crenshaw-Dickson, but a guy that maybe you still have some question marks about. Devin Manuel, I think one of the more impactful players on this Florida Gators roster heading into 2024. If he figures it out, if he emerges as a starting caliber tackle, you're looking at a really solid tackle duo. But the competition in the depth, at least that's there. That wasn't there in 2023. You're kind of forced to trot out a guy in Damian George that just was not an offensive tackle at the SEC level. Now, you switch into the inside, a unit that I don't think was as bad as a lot of Florida Gator fans or a lot of college football fans think it was last year. But you got a lot of competition in there too. One, I mean, I'm excited to see what Damian George looks like as a guard. I mean, we kind of know he can't play tackle after what we saw in 2023. They were just forced to continue to play him because they didn't have anybody else. What does Damian George look like at guard? A massive storyline. And then the two guys that I'm keeping an eye on, and I want to start with Najee Harris. This is a guy that I absolutely love coming out of high school. He was a guy that I included on my breakout performers list the other day. A guy that I think fits what Billy Napier wants to do extremely well on the offensive line. This is a road grader, a guy that has a super powerful lower half, can move people off the line of scrimmage. But you go back to that Charlotte game, you saw Najee Harris play some really good guard and pass protection as well. He's got good feet for his size. And then talk about a guy like Roger Kearney coming in too to add some more competition. I think this offensive line is in a much better standpoint from a talent standpoint and from a depth standpoint heading into 2024. And if this offensive line comes together, giving Graham Mertz a little bit more time, getting that Florida Gators run game going, that is how this Florida offense takes that step in 2024. Extremely excited to just hear about how that offensive line it kind of shakes out heading into that 2024 year. Next position group that I'm really intrigued to read the spring practice notes is that linebacker room. And this was another, we got this ad out of the way real quick. That's another position that largely was not good for the Florida Gators in 2023. We've talked about this extensively. The missed tackles, the blown assignments, the bad run fits for this Florida Gators linebacker group last year, it was just not good enough, right? Scooby Williams misses 23% of his tackles. Taraja Mitchell misses 26.7% of his tackles. Derek Wingo missed 33% of his tackles. The missed tackles were a massive problem for this Florida unit last year. You look at what this linebacker room can look like in 2024. I think it's crazy to say this is one of the better linebacker rooms on paper from a talent standpoint in the SEC, right? Pup Howard, a guy that I am extremely excited about what year 2 brings for him, transferring over from South Carolina. And then Shamar James, who I think was by far the best player on that Florida Gators defense in 2023 before dealing with the injury. And then you have some guys coming up, right? Miles Graham enrolled for spring practice. Aiden Child's going to get there in the summer. Those are two guys we've talked about a lot in terms of tone setters at that linebacker room. Not sure how much they'll play in 2024 because you have two dogs in Pup Howard and Shamar James, but certainly providing some depth for that linebacker position heading into 2024. You look at Billy Napier, and I think one of the most exciting things that he's done is he took a look at this team and said, hey, where were we the worst at in 2023? What were the problems that we needed to fix with this roster? Offensive line, linebacker room, secondary, and he is significantly improved all of those position groups. And that's the next unit I want to talk about in terms of reading. And what I'm most excited for the secondary room is not necessarily the players, but kind of how they put this puzzle piece together. You have a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things. I've read the message boards. I've listened to a lot of Florida Gators podcasts. The conversation is, where do all of these guys slot in the back end of this Florida Gators defense? But at the end of the day, you have a good problem on your hands, right? You have a lot of guys that are versatile, that can do a lot of different things. That's going to go a long way in getting your best 5 defensive backs out on the field. Want to talk about the cornerback room first. Devin Moore, I thought was really good for the Florida Gators in 2023. I think him and Jason Marshall probably locked down those 2 boundary cornerback spots. And a guy like Jason Marshall, I would love to see him get back to that form where we were talking about him being a potential NFL draft pick. You kind of saw that play dip. I think that the consistency wasn't always there. You saw him flash some really good play, but he would give up the big play. And I think that's why the Florida Gator fans were so frustrated with Jason Marshall the last year. If he can clean that up, you're looking at a cornerback that at the very least has the potential to be a very good cornerback in the SEC. Now the fun begins where you're starting to talk about, all right, what does the star position look like? What do the safety positions look like? I think it starts with some of that young talent. Bryce Thornton, Jordan Castile, 2 guys that kind of got thrown into the fire last year, played some really good football. Those guys are going to be hard to unseat as your starters, but you go and bring in some veterans, right? Guys like DJ Douglas, guys like Asa Turner, Triquez Bridges. So now you look at this room and you have the young guys with a lot of potential, Jordan Castile, Bryce Thornton, and then you have some guys in Asa Turner, DJ Douglas, Triquez Bridges that give you that veteran kind of high floor in that secondary. Now, where I think this slots in, I think you see Bryce Thornton, Jordan Castile, probably year 2 safeties. And then I personally lean DJ Douglas for that star position. I think that when you turn on the film of that Tulane team, this was a guy that I think fits perfectly what you want to do with that star position, a guy that can come up and tackle in the box, can blitz off the edge, can be a guy that can match up with those slot wide receivers in coverage. I think he checks a lot of the boxes. I think he's most comfortable around the line of scrimmage. So I lean DJ Douglas as that starting star. But Triquez Bridges, a guy that I'm a massive fan of, just didn't really get the opportunity at Oregon to play, but a lot of talent, a lot of length and athleticism. I really like how this secondary in general is shaken out. And you have some young guys at the cornerback spot too, in DeJon Johnson and Jakeem Jackson, who really could take some steps going into 2024. Again, another position, offensive line, linebacker, secondary, they fix some of those problems. You feel better about some of the weaker parts of that Florida depth chart heading into 2024. Next thing that I'm not a question, more just excitement here is, what's this wide receiver development look like? We obviously saw Eugene Wilson break out onto the scene in 2024. Adam Ezell was kind of my pick to be that breakout true freshman. What does the development look like with Andy Jean and Aiden Mizell, right? You know Eugene Wilson is going to be that guy. I think Tremere Dike comes in and kind of plays that Ricky Pearsall role. Now, Ricky Pearsall, going back, watching more Florida, he was phenomenal for Florida. Probably one of the more underrated wide receivers in the SEC last year. I think Tremere Dike, with the experience and chemistry he has with Graham Mertz going back to Wisconsin, certainly helps. And this is not me writing off guys like Khalil Jackson, who I know is a Florida Gator fan favorite. I just think the potential that Andy Jean and Aiden Mizell have is really exciting. And what are we hearing from spring practice in terms of the development of those two freshmen? We know Eugene Wilson, probably one of the most explosive players in the SEC. Can Andy Jean and Aiden Mizell catch up to a guy like Eugene Wilson and provide some more talent at that wide receiver room? Now, last question that I'm looking at is, what does the running back depth look like? And we talked about Montrell Johnson, a guy that I think has a chance to really break out for the Florida Gators in that 2024 year. A guy that I think is going to get better with a more workload. You take a look at Montrell Johnson. When does he excel? We talked about it the other day. The 2 games where he had 18 plus carries, both of those games, he went over 100 yards. I think Montrell Johnson's a guy that is going to benefit from a bigger workload, wearing teams down, leaning on teams. Montrell Johnson is not a guy you want to tackle 20 plus times per game. But what does it look like behind him, right? You have a guy like Treyon Webb. My personal pick is Conan Daniels coming in as a true freshman. You also have a guy like Cam Carroll. And I guess the conversation is, all right, Montrell Johnson probably our running back 1, but Florida wants to run the ball a lot. It's important to have depth. Which of those guys emerge as that RB2 that can really spell Montrell Johnson? Another question that I have for this Florida Gators program, and I mean, we're not going to end the conversation about Florida spring practice without talking a little DJ Lagway, who I think is kind of in that perfect role where you didn't want DJ Lagway having to be thrusted into starting duty in 2024. I think there's probably a good chance that Billy Napier finds a way to get him on the field. He's kind of just too talented not to, whether that looks like packages, whether it just looks like what Michigan did with J.J. McCarthy as a true freshman. You have Graham Mertz to be a guy that was really good towards the end of 2023. And then you have a super talented DJ Lagway that's waiting in the wings. I love the quarterback room. That's exactly how you want it to look. A veteran that gives you a high floor and a youngster that gives you the high ceiling. This is a program that I think fixed a lot of the problems, at least on paper, that you saw in 2023. Now, spring practice rolling around, you want to see some of these problems not only getting fixed on paper, you want to see that manifest onto the football field as well. A team I'm extremely excited to talk about as spring practice rolls through. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. A team we're going to be talking a lot about as spring practice plays out. Appreciate y'all, and we'll talk to you guys later.